and welcome. This is our February 2023 TAD Talk, and here to speak with us is Reverend Jeff Perkins. The title of his TAD Talk is He, She, They, It's All Okay. And I'm not going to give much more preamble than that. I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over.
Before we get started with a lovely PowerPoint that I have, I just want to thank you all for being with us tonight. And my intentions tonight are simply to share some of the journey that I've had in working with our transgender community, and also it's a conversation that is corporate, it's social, but it's also very personal. And I hope that we'll be able to have a time for questions, particularly if they come up during the presentation. If you want to write those down, and we can discuss them toward the end of our time together. That way we'll have hopefully a more orderly way of proceeding. So I am the manager of spiritual care for UC Health at Westchester Hospital, Drake, Acute Care Rehab, and Bridgeway Point. And so I work with a lot of different folks at different stages of their life and development. And we have quite a few staff folks that we provide care for, spiritual care. And along with our responsibilities for our teams and for our patients, we have several interdisciplinary committees. And one of those committees is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And it's a UC Health sponsored entity. We have a vice president of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It's become quite an important topic for UC Health. As a matter of fact, there are a group of folks from UC Health who will be attending the Human Rights Gala this weekend in Cincinnati. And so my husband and I, Michael, will be attending that, in part for UC Health. So we're grateful to be able to be a part and with community in that setting. Before coming to Cincinnati in 2015, I was as chaplain among the homeless population in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I learned a lot from my homeless friends, folks experiencing homelessness. And there's so many stories. There's so many heart-rending, life-changing experiences that I've shared with our friends. One in particular I want to share with you. It is a story between a young couple, John and Shay. So John and Shay had almost graduated from high school. John came out to his parents that he was gay, and both John and Shay came from very religious households. John was immediately kicked out of his family household. He was just at 17. Shay is a transgendered female. And so when she came out to her parents, they knew her by another name, by another gender. They immediately kicked her out as well of her household, and she was 16. So I think John had just finished high school. I believe maybe he had gone independently. Shay had not. And so they were a couple, and they showed up in the district in Knoxville, Tennessee, where many homeless folks gather. And it was my privilege to meet both of them. They were experiencing what they later came to call religious trauma, and were struggling to find any place in their life for anything sacred. They had a few couple weeks on the streets. The organization I was working for was focused on helping to provide sustainable housing for folks. Both Shay and John were huffers. I don't know how many of you know what huffing is, but they made do by huffing typically spray paint or other inhalants. And so when you would see them, you would see a little bit of the spray paint on their face. They would try to rub it off, but they were struggling with that. And I believe intentionally with their whole life wanting to be clean and wanting to move forward. The shelter that was primarily in Knoxville, Tennessee was faith-owned, and they had a problem finding housing inside at night because, for one, John had to declare that he was gay, and the folks experiencing homelessness were segregated into men and into women, and the two weren't mixed. And so with John being a gay male, he was not allowed entrance into the male part, and with Shay being a transgender female, so she presented as female as she could, but was obviously biologically male. She was not allowed into the shelter either. And so they were both forced to sleep on the streets. So I worked with them trying to get them some support, trying to get them some at least food and shelter. But in 2 weeks' time, they disappeared. And so when I went down to the community to find out what happened, the story was that both John and Shay were last seen stepping into a white utility van, and that the people who were driving the van had promised them that they would take them someplace where they would be taken care of. This story was repeated time and time again among our LGBTQIA young people, and many of them transgender. They would disappear into human trafficking whenever they would come out and be kicked out of their families. And there's an incredible tragedy. There were so many opportunities along the way for them to find support, for them to find hope, but that did not occur by the very people who should have been able to protect them and to care for them. So I'm going to upload, I can, the PowerPoint at this time. Yeah. All right, so great. I've been assured that you can see what I'm sharing. Is that correct?
That's correct. And
Great.
if you
All
hit
right. Thank
start,
you.
if you hit start slideshow, then we can see it like it's just a regular PowerPoint.
Okay. So can you see this sufficiently, or should I go and do something else?
We just see it like you're editing it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So I have a lovely assistant with me tonight. My husband, and he's going to help me with this. Okay. Slideshow, got it. Okay, we'll just do it this way. All right, so I want to thank, I don't know who made the ad for the time together, but they provided the first slide, so thank you for that bit. But talking about homelessness and LGBTQ youth, as you can see, it's a significant problem for many young people. I'd like to direct your attention to the dark section at the very top. 14.4% is the average age that lesbian and gay youth in New York become homeless, and 13.5 is the average age that transgender youth in New York become homeless. So you see it's significantly younger that transgender young people experience this lack of protection, security, and safety. Homelessness among our LGBTQIA community is significant. A lot of families aren't aware of how to take care of their young people. And so when a young person comes out, particularly if the family is already at risk, those support services aren't provided inside the context of the family, and the young people reach out to the greater community hoping to find support. Unfortunately, that support isn't always in place, particularly if they live in more rural or suburban communities. So as you can see, 68% of homeless LGBTQ youth have been rejected by their families. 54% have experienced family abuse. So it's a matter of survival for them to get out of their household so that they can be taken care of. 1 in 3 transgender people have been turned away from shelters. That is difficult to believe. What I found in the situation in Knoxville, Tennessee, when I went down to speak with the folks at the shelter, they did not have a working knowledge of vocabulary concerning transgender people or really LGBTQ people at all. They didn't understand, and so they just lopped everyone into the same category, and didn't want to deal with people that they didn't quite understand, who didn't look and act like themselves. So that was a tragic loss for this community. I'd like to share with you the gender unicorn. How many of you have seen this representation before. I hope some of you may have. This really helps us to understand when transgender folks are talking about who they are and how they see themselves, to understand the different aspects of what makes us a person. First of all, with gender identity, a person could be male, female, man, boy, woman, girl, or they could be other genders. They could be non-binary. That's how they see their gender. That's how they view themselves internally. When they look inside, that's who they see when they look in the mirror. Gender expression is how they present themselves to the public, how they appear outwardly, feminine, masculine, or they could be non-binary, other. Sex assigned at birth. Male and female, I think, are pretty self-explanatory, but then there are folks who are other or intersex. There are people who are born in such a way that they manifest the sex organs and the appearance of both genders, or what we commonly hold on to, male or female. And then there's physically attracted to, which I was fascinated by these last two, how a person can be physically attracted to someone who is a specific gender, but then emotionally attracted to someone of a different gender, or be physically attracted to someone who is non-binary, or maybe someone would consider themselves to be sapiosexual. They're attracted to someone because of the complexity or the beauty of their mind. It's not necessarily the sexual manifestation, but it is the person that they see them as, regardless of whether they're male or female or non-binary. And then emotionally attracted to, I've met many folks who would identify as straight, cisgender normative, male or female, and they have a physical attraction to members of the opposite sex, but they are emotionally attracted to someone who is the same gender that they are. And that seems to be a fairly common understanding. So I hope that this is helpful in understanding identity, expression, physical and emotional attraction. So gender pronouns are essential for folks to be known. This was a big project at Westchester Hospital. We have several people that come to the hospital for gender reassignment procedures. So it could be surgery, it could be hormone therapy, it could be various other types of therapeutic interventions to help them appear and manifest as their, as what they call their given gender. We had a lot of struggles with the correct vocabulary, and often as medical providers, our folks would struggle with not wanting to offend somebody. And so if they saw someone whose chart said that they were male, but they presented as female, they would, our staff would do everything they could to not offend them, which meant often the patients were ignored, they weren't addressed, they weren't brought into a personal connection with their care providers. So education is essential in allowing staff to become more comfortable, number one, with utilizing different pronouns, chosen pronouns of the patient, but number two, and maybe even more importantly, being comfortable making mistakes and asking for forgiveness and apologizing. When a person is misgendered, when they state someone's pronoun in a way that doesn't correlate with the patient's identity, we have the opportunity to back up and apologize and say, I'm sorry, I forgot. And a little personal story, I have three daughters. They're 29, 27, and 25 years old. My oldest daughter and her husband live in North Carolina, close to Asheville. My older son-in-law has two moms, so we grew up in a lesbian household. My middle daughter is lesbian, and she is partnered with Kate. Kate is a student at Duke University studying classical languages and getting her PhD. So a bright person. Kate is non-binary and identifies as they, them. My daughter, Lauren, identifies as she, they. And I didn't know this until Christmas this year. And I we gathered together, and my younger daughter, by the way, is married to a guy, and they have a baby, and my oldest daughter has a child too, and they live in Knoxville, Tennessee. But so we gathered together for Christmas, and I misgendered Kate the whole time. It wasn't intentional. It was accidental. I didn't realize until I appeared for our gathering that that Kate had revealed herself as non-binary, and so I was awful. I was awful, but I tried and I apologized and I learned. So as we speak with people, please please acknowledge their pronouns, please. So a few things that you might want to know about folks who are trans. These are just 5 small facts. Not all trans people identify as male or female. There are a lot of different ways that people identify outside of the gender binary. Some people consider fluidity as a part of their identity. So in some circumstances, at some times, they may consider themselves male or female or something in between. And so making space for that is very important. Number 2, trans folks actually have many different orientations. So their identity and their orientation are on a separate spectrum. Trans people led the Stonewall riots, which is in many ways considered the beginning of the gay rights movement. So our trans folks are truly heroes, and they're very brave. And I think by virtue of the fact that it takes so much courage to be different and to endure so much hardship, many of our trans friends are survivors, and they've struggled, and they've been on the front lines of advocating for many people. Not all trans people want surgery, and even among those who do, very few of them actually are able to get it. Insurance is a reason, access to the medical care that's necessary. Also, finances are many times just way out of the range for folks who would like to have procedures. And then finally, the word transgender was popularized by Virginia Prince in 1969. So it's been around for a little while, but for many years, people who are considered transgender have had a whole load of different names assigned to them, and some of them are pejorative and very harsh. What I've found in the transgender community is that many times transgender people will refer to one another using terminology that people outside of the transgender community better not use. And so that's just part, I think, of the privilege of being transgender, is you get to refer to one another with terminology that is group terminology. And so I learned the hard way, trying to appeal and be approachable. I was actually quite offensive. So again, a way to learn from our circumstances. So one of the ways that we've made strides in our society is with trans visibility, allowing people to see folks who are transgender represented on television, in media, in stories. There's more media representation, particularly on TV, of trans people than there have ever been. And often these characters are portrayed as being strong and resilient, powerful and inspiring. And so that really is very helpful. In the past, often LGBTQIA folks were pictured as weak, as victims. They were often pictured by media as, and in many ways, as freaks, and someone to be scared of if you saw them on the streets. And so I applaud the more positive representation of our trans community. So a few things to be mindful of concerning our trans folks. 80% of trans students feel unsafe at school because of their gender expression. Verbal harassment, teasing because of their gender expression can be endemic in schools. It's hard enough if you're a young person simply to survive middle school, but if you represent as a person that isn't congruent with your birth gender, or if you move back and forth, in many schools it is, young people would say it's a death wish. And so a lot of persecution, a lot of violence results. 49% fully, right at half of all trans people reported physical abuse in a 2007 survey. So that is rough when it's people in your community, in your school, but what about people that you're intimate with? People that you have a relationship with and you trust yourself with. 50% of trans people have been raped or assaulted by a romantic partner. This is not always the case that the partner of a trans person wasn't aware of the trans person's biology. Sometimes they are. More often than not, they're absolutely aware, but they see the trans person as being weak and being vulnerable, and so they will physically abuse their transgender partner. And the trans person often doesn't have a sense of recourse. And when they report this violence to the authorities, they're not really listened or taken seriously. Trans people of color are 6 times more likely to experience physical violence when interacting with the police than white cisgender survivors of violence. So we had, so being at Westchester Hospital, it's considered a rather privileged community. We have the demographics that would reflect an urban upper class demographic. And so our medical issues are sometimes quite different than what would be experienced at the Clifton campus. However, last year we had a Black transgender female who was lured into a scene with 2 other young people. These were minors who, when they had the transgender female drive up, they shot her and killed her and stole her car. When asked why they did that, the young people said she was a tranny and her life doesn't matter, and we liked her car. That was the excuse that they used. I find that violence on transgender people of color is endemic. Michael and I went to our Trans Day of Awareness, which is held annually in Cincinnati, and the vast majority of those who were murdered in the year that's being recognized were people of color, trans people of color. So it really is very scary to be a trans person of color. 41% of trans people have attempted suicide. That's significant. Homelessness among trans population is very large. There aren't a lot of protections for trans people. How many of you heard of the gay panic defense? Anyone? The gay panic defense, which is this defense that people can use if they kill someone who is gay or trans. They can claim, and that someone who's killed somebody can claim that they didn't know that the person was gay or trans. And that is an acceptable defense in many states of this nation, including Ohio. It's an acceptable defense that will get someone's penalty reduced because they didn't know that the person was trans. Therefore, the panic that ensued allowed them to have an excuse for killing the person. So we have a lot of work to do in that area. So there are several questions that people have. I had a conversation with someone today, even when I was showing them this presentation, they were like, oh, but trans people always regret having had surgeries. and so that shouldn't be provided for people. And then the question comes up, what age is old enough to have gender confirming surgery or procedures? So my husband is a counselor in an elementary school. And there are children who are convinced, and their parents likewise, that this child is transgender. And that makes it complicated for society. But oddly enough, it's not that complicated for the child or for the parent. Once they come to the conclusion that this is what's right for their child, or this is what's right for themselves. So let's look at a few statistics. On a 2011 study of 448 individuals, 94% of trans people reported an improvement of their quality of life due to transitioning. 94%. When was the last time Cracker Barrel got that kind of approval rate? It's been a while. 96% answered that their sense of well-being improved. There are so many myths that surround people who have transitional surgeries, that it'll make people bitter or depressed. 9 out of 10 reported that their overall personality improved due to transitioning. 85% reported that their emotional stability was improved. 11% reported no significant change, which leaves 4% who said that they were less stable after their surgeries, after their transition. So transition satisfaction rates, overall, 96% said that they were satisfied with the results of their surgery. 97% hormone therapy, 96% chest surgery, 90% genital surgery. You know, the doctors in my facility would be thrilled to have these kind of satisfaction rates with their performances. And yet we have a society that looks at this process and tries to demonize it, even with these statistics in hand. So a few things that are illegal, particularly for young people. And we've heard some mention of trans folks in sports and athletics. And it can be divisive. It can be divisive. If you are, for example, a female who has trained all of her life to perform at a high level, and then a person comes in who is biologically male, but they believe themselves to be female, and they've trained at a higher level, and they are physiologically stronger and bigger, and now they're competing against you in the female class. There's room for some discussion and conversation about the fairness of that. I'm not making a decision either way. I'm just saying that there is a lot of conversation that surrounds these matters. But this happens even in elementary school. So I don't know about you guys, but when I was in kindergarten, one of the first, I grew up with 3 brothers, no sisters. One of the first times that I realized there were separate bathrooms for boys and girls was in kindergarten. And the teacher said, okay, boys, you go over here, girls, you go over here. And I thought, why can't we just use the same bathroom? Typically, we all know how to operate a bathroom without specific instructions. I was shocked. And then you go to elementary school, and now you're divided up because now you have the boys' bathroom, the girls' bathroom, but you also divide up into teams when you're in gym class, right? The boys over here, the girls over here. You have different kinds of activities for different genders. You have the guys playing basketball and being rough and aggressive, and you have the girls doing a different athletic activity that isn't nearly as fierce. And that's just the way we were instructed in elementary school and middle school. And then the teams are separated. You have girls volleyball, you have men's teams football. You don't have the mixing of the genders at all. You don't have the co-ed level. And so it's no wonder that it's a confusing environment when we start talking about transgender folks wanting to play athletics. On what team should they play? And how should that look? We have people who try to have their name changed in order to identify with their gender. And folks refuse, even with a court order, to recognize their name. And so if you have a child who is born a male but identifies as female, comes to school and says, no, please call me Rosa, not Ron, teachers struggle to acquiesce to the desires of the child or the child's parents, and will continue to call that child Ron, which causes stress and trauma for the child because the teacher has, in many circumstances, a moral dictate that disagrees with the child and the child's parents' decision. Now, to complicate that matter even more, when you have a child who believes that they are trans or they're curious about that, something doesn't quite settle right in their inside parts about their gender. And so they're curious and they're afraid to tell their parents because they're afraid that their parents may harass them or force them in a certain direction. And so they ask that at school that they would be called sue or something else when they're a male, but please don't let my mommy and daddy know. And that creates a lot of difficulty as well, ethically, in our communities. And so that is something that we have to work through, particularly if a child feels that they're in danger at home, if they admit to their family that they may be transgender. We also have folks that struggle with how a person dresses. I'm like, this is 2023, people, really? But folks do struggle with the way people dress. And I am a cisgender normative gay male, but you know what? I'm going to tell you, sometimes I like to put a dress on just because it feels cool. I've not really gone out too much with one on, but what if I did? What would it matter if I did? What would it matter? So in schools and in places of work, there are restrictions. And so if I wanted to wear, as a male with a beard, a dress to work as the head chaplain for 3 facilities with UC Health, I bet that I might get a complaint or 2 or 10 or fired. So things aren't nearly as far along as we'd like to think. So our transgender folks in our LGBTQ community have particular rights. This is a struggle for parents and for those who are allies with our transgender community. Our LGBTQI folks don't know that they have these rights, and neither do advocates. So please look at this. So non-conforming trans and transgender youth have the right to equal education regardless of their gender identity or expression. They have the right to not be harassed, victimized, or bullied because they're transgender or gender nonconforming. School faculty are obligated to take action against harassment, victimization, or bullying. This is hard. This is hard for a lot of teachers and administrators to advocate for the transgender or gender nonconforming youth, because they get pushback and pressure from the community that doesn't believe in transgender young people. And to go a step further, if you do support and keep these children from being harassed, then now you're trying to convert children to be transgender. You're trying to pressure them and push them into being gay or lesbian or bisexual. If you make information available, now you're trying to coerce children into a certain lifestyle. And so faculty and staff of schools have been intimidated, coerced, and in many ways forced to not support the children that they are obligated to care for. So Michael and I are leaving in a couple of days. So this is a Friday before a week of vacation for us. And we're going to be going to visit my parents who live in Florida. And so my parents are like, can you guys move to Florida and be with us because it's now 85 degrees? And right now we have snow coming down. They're like, it's 85 degrees and wonderful, palm trees, and it's majestic. And I'm like, there is no way that I would live in Florida, given the state of discrimination against young people who are LGBTQIA. There's no way that I could perform my legal and ethical obligations in that environment. So, more rights. Young people have the right to wear clothing and hairstyles and present themselves in a way that's consistent with their gender identity, as long as they follow the rules for appropriate attire that apply to all students. Parents don't understand that privilege, and a lot of young people are very afraid, but they have that right and privilege. They also have the right to privacy concerning their transgender and transitional status. So privacy from who? What kind of privacy? Privacy to not reveal that to their parents? Privacy to not reveal it to doctors? Other medical personnel? So they also have the right to be free from sexual violence. So what does sexual violence look like for a trans person in middle school? Harassment certainly falls into that category. Being bullied and pushed around in the locker room. I don't know how many schools have locker room spaces for trans students. If you are a transgender male, which means you were born female and you identify as a male, so you're a transgender male, and you go to the girls' locker room to change your clothes for gym class, you identify as a male and you're looking at your female classmates taking their clothes off. For young people, that would be a little uncomfortable. For many people, that would be uncomfortable. Let's say you're a transgender female and you identify as female, but you have the body parts of a male, therefore you're forced to change your clothes in the men's locker room. And you see naked guys going to the shower and everywhere else. You would be very self-conscious of your own body, and you would feel like you're being forced to be in an environment that feels threatening to you. That is not a safe space. So as a person at work who advocates for the rights of LGBTQIA folks and trans folks, I'm challenged to take that advocacy wherever I go, not just at work. So our missions committee at First Baptist Church Dayton, on which I serve on the board, said, so what can we do to appeal to the transgender and the LGBTQIA community? We have a booth at Pride. We're active and involved in the community. Almost 15% of the congregation of First Baptist Church Dayton is LGBTQIA. And I said, what about our bathrooms? We have transgender people who come to our church and they can't find a place to go to the bathroom. They don't identify as male or female. So we have gender nonconforming or all gender restrooms. An easy change. All you had to do is put a plaque on the wall. It's like all are welcome here. And these are typically one-seaters. And so there's that sense of safety in that environment. So let me suggest that that you take that advocacy a step further and speak up for people when you hear that comments are being made that are negative towards LGBTQIA people or trans folks. But people will often, in the context of joking and jesting, reveal how they feel internally. And then when you confront them, they're like, "Oh, I'm just kidding." Well, no, you're not just kidding. You're actually expressing a thought that you may have that is potentially incorrect, at least at the most harmful to someone who identifies as transgender or LGBTQIA. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next one. So how do we make schools safer for LGBTQIA people? We have the opportunity to speak out. That means we have the opportunity to be an activist. When we see discrimination taking place, to step in. And a big word of suggestion here, you're not doing the LGBTQIA community a favor when you're a jerk. When you get all angry and you start throwing things and yelling and saying this isn't right, and your reason for advocating is because you have a friend who's gay or a friend who's transgender, but you're not equipped with the information and you don't have this. So people who can calmly step into this environment typically are those who are armed and equipped and have a sense of peace in speaking with people who don't quite understand, who are aggressively opposed to trans rights or LGBTQIA rights. People may be wrong, but they're still people. People may be adamantly opposed to you having a safe place in society, but they're still people. Amazingly enough, we've learned in human behavior that you have a greater ability to convince folks of a certain point of view if you're a decent person, if you're not an obnoxious jerk. So utilize your skills in communicating as you advocate for LGBTQIA people. The last thing we want to be seen as are unruly, uncivilized, wild folk. So having a space for students to gather together with a community sponsor or a school sponsor that they can talk about with their feelings and their thoughts. There may be straight students who are wondering about their sexual identity, and they simply need a place where they can talk about it. It is a topic. We may say you're not allowed to talk about it at school. You're not allowed to have curriculum that talks that mentions it. But do these kids have cell phones? Yes. Do these kids know how to access information? Absolutely. Do these kids watch TV? Well, mostly, yeah. And so they're going to have access to the challenging thoughts, but do they have the support they need to navigate through all of this information? When we take access to information away from students and support, we are actually leaving them isolated in a world full of ideas and thoughts without the mentorship to navigate who they are safely. When they don't have that support among people who are able to navigate them, it becomes more and more dangerous for these young folks. Educate your teachers. Let teachers know what the rights of students are. Schedule a conference with your teacher or speak at a faculty meeting about LGBTQ issues. Allow them to know that they have support in the community. I believe most teachers, not all, but most teachers really want to advocate for the wellness of their children and their students that they are obligated to care for. But they simply need to know that they have people who have their back, and they have folks who will advocate for them as well. Host an LGBTQ panel. All right, so this is something kind of personal. It is good if you're not a part of the LGBTQ community to make a friend with people who are. Have folks over for dinner. Go out and have coffee with someone who identifies as part of the LGBTQIA community. You may be as straight as an arrow and not identify personally at all. You may have family members, you may know people, but get to know people personally, know their stories, facts, statistics don't communicate nearly as well as a personal story of someone's struggle and then hopefully someone's victory. Include or introduce a trans inclusive policy. This may be at school, this may also be at work. This may be in your faith community. My own personal journey. So I'm a licensed and ordained Southern Baptist minister, which is kind of shocking. If my faith community knew, first of all, that I work with people of a different faith tradition, my ordination would be stripped. If they knew that I was divorced from a woman, my ordination would be stripped. If they knew that I was married to a really hot guy, my ordination would be stripped. So my husband's laughing in the background. So I have I have a lot of reasons to be concerned about the status of my ordination, and we're addressing that, and it's coming along. But a lot of people in faith communities are religiously and spiritually traumatized. And they want nothing to do with people of any faith tradition or anyone that says they belong to any kind of church. And so when we go into the LGBTQIA community, we do so humbly. We do so with a sense of apology and with open arms and an open heart as learners, not as teachers, and maybe at first not even as mentors or advocates, but as students. And we say, teach me. Let me know what it is that you're struggling with. Let me know how it is that I can help you. Tell me your story. And that speaks multitudes of goodwill and allows us to be able to function while making mistakes, which we will make. We will make mistakes in helping people, which is good. Here are some links that I would like for you to have access to. So the slides that you saw today came from these links. Trans Awareness and Empowerment Week, Center of Belonging and Social Change at OSU is really, really helpful. And many of you may have questions about how this all operates in real life. There's so much more that you have access to at these links than I was able to share with you. So you might want to take a screenshot if you can with your cell phone of this page, or I've sent this presentation to Meredith, and she may be able to share it with you as well, and utilize that for your own information. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. All right, here we are. We're back, and see if there are any questions. There are some chat questions, and so do you mind if I address those first? And then if you
Go
have any
right
other,
ahead.
can I do that? Okay. So what percentage of shelters are religious owned? And do any religious-based shelters accept LGBTQIA people? I know that there's a big issue in Cincinnati with the one of the major shelters. I'm not going to say any names, but to the point where a major contributor to that shelter said that we will give you money if you make sure that no LGBTQIA people are mentoring students and programming or volunteering in your shelter. And so they were limiting access to volunteers and to facilitators. Do they keep gay people out? I'm not sure about the Cincinnati shelter, but they certainly aren't, they haven't demonstrated themselves to be allies. In Knoxville, Tennessee, and I would think more in the South, you would have a lot of shelters that are owned and operated by faith communities and in rural areas. But in larger areas, and maybe out west and on the East Coast, I think you would find more progressive homeless shelters. How much of the trans discrimination is based on religion? Have there been court cases that address separation of church and state, constitutional issues in regards to trans discrimination in schools, for example, details and findings? That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. Almost every person that I know who has issues with trans people cite God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, or that we are created in the image, or this one, and I heard this today as well, which was twice, which was kind of disturbing from some of my patients, that and I didn't even bring it up, that that the left has to tone it down because the people on the right are getting sick and tired of having trans issues crammed down their throat. That God made man for women and women for man, and there's no confusion when God created us. So all confusion comes from the enemy. So that's what I heard today. So that certainly is religion based. However, on the other side, God, the concept in religion that God created humanity in God's image, that would be man and woman, I guess that makes God trans. Or at least maybe non-binary. So yeah, but I've mentioned that a few times to people, to haters, and they struggle with that. And there are plenty of opportunities in scripture, in biblical, in Christian scripture and Jewish scripture, into other faith traditions, holy scriptures, to see people who, characters and heroes who manifested behaviors that didn't necessarily jive with their gender, type in that time of history. And so there are plenty of examples. In seminary schools, is there any consideration for the emotional health of trans gay kids? Is there only fixed religious conversion? So I underwent 3 to 4 years of conversion therapy. And as you can tell, it worked. Not at all. So, but there was a lot of trauma that had to be undone by years and years of therapy. And I think that there are schools, there are religious groups that are advocating and heroes for trans people and gay people, and they're on the front lines. As a matter of fact, 3 years ago in Dayton, Ohio, there were 3 faith communities that were represented at Pride. There were 3 booths. So our church had one of those booths. This last year, I think there were like 7 or more faith communities that had booths at Pride, handing out materials and saying, we are welcoming and affirming. We are here to support you. and to listen to your stories, which I thought was beautiful. And yes, so the last screen, yeah, thank you, Meredith, for sending that PowerPoint out to everybody. I appreciate it. Hey, so I don't think that I have the ability to unmute anyone, but if anyone wants to ask any questions with the remaining time that we have or make any comments, please do. Yes, Tim.
If someone would post one of the posters that your education resource, transgender education resource group created, and they posted that in a school in Ohio, would that be in violation of some of the most recent legislation in Ohio?
I think you would need to talk with the principal of the school first, and then potentially that principal then would also go to the superintendent and seek guidance. And maybe the most successful step would be to let your administration know that they have support in the community for gay and trans people. So I'm not always an advocate of posters without having someone to explain what that means and how that can be utilized. It can actually it can be used against you in many circumstances.
Great points.
All right, someone else.
Hi, Jeff. I'm Linnea.
Hi, Linnea.
In Cincinnati, are there what resources do parents go to? Parents who've got kids who are saying, at age 5, 6, 7, 8, that they think they're trans. Where
Sure.
can parents go?
Great question. So on that last screen the last link was a great source of information for parents of young children or children who have some potential not gender dysmorphia, but they have questions about their identity, their gender identity. So that is a great source. I didn't have the opportunity to do a lot of information about that and present, but that link would be really, really useful. In Cincinnati, so we have an LGBTQIA center in Dayton, and I know that exists in Cincinnati as well. The OSU website also had links that went out to different cities in Ohio. And so you could just follow the link pattern and the spider web for Cincinnati specifically. Honestly, I would talk with the administrator for the local school system and see if they have an LGBTQIA support team in the school. And that may be a great place to get resources. So my husband is a school counselor and works with children and with families that are in this certain circumstance. He's in the Oakwood school system, which is not Dayton public schools. And so that's part of his responsibility. And so I'm sure many of our school systems would have counselors that have the same responsibility.
Thank you.
Yes, Tim.
How do people access your services at University of Cincinnati?
So what at my team, I have about 70 members of my spiritual care team. So many are volunteers and several are staff. We see every inpatient within 12 to 24 hours of admission, and which generates about 52,000 visits a year.
Wow.
So we go out into the hospital. We don't wait for consults. However, we do sometimes receive consults. We're also, as we're visiting with patients, we're taking note. And in the patient's medical record, this is important to know, there is an indication if the patient is transgender, if their chosen name and chosen identity is different from their birth gender or from their physiological makeup. There's a note that comes up. And so we can see that in the patient's chart. And when that happens, that's kind of a trigger for us to go in and provide some extra care and comfort for those patients and their families. But the information, if someone had some questions from the community, probably the last place they would go would be the hospital chaplain, just because often we're seen as the grim reapers of the hospital, which is unfortunate, or they assume a certain mantle of religious intolerance, unfortunately, on our part. But our teams are very, very strongly instructed to be welcoming and affirming and embracing and intelligent when it comes to that dialogue. All right, Lois.
Hi, thanks for all of this. Cincinnati Children's Hospital has a transgender health clinic. I think didn't you answer that question, Tim, where parents would go, they could take their child to that. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And, fortunately for Children's and Cincinnati, unfortunately for UC Health, they are about 30 years ahead of us in their platform of addressing the needs of transgender children and LGBTQIA children in general and their families. I believe they even have specific staff chaplains that are dedicated to that population and the community. And I'm certain that they could also be a resource for the general community outside of the walls of the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Yes, Linnea.
You're right about Children's. We've done some work with them. We have a relationship with them. And that, I think, and you would probably know this, Jeff, they did a research study on the importance of spirituality to trans persons. And it's very important, especially if they've been rejected by their families. They hope that they hang on to their faith, and they hope somebody in their faith community can be welcoming to them. And so we've done some work with them and we'll continue to do. I have a question, though, for just you.
Sure.
Were you always a Baptist minister?
I started preaching when I was 16 years old.
Wow.
So you guys may be familiar with the Creation Museum
Oh, yeah.
on 275. And so my folks had a farm in Rabbit Hash, Kentucky, and that's where I grew up. And so so the church, a small Baptist church, is adjacent to that property. Actually, the Creation Museum was built on property owned by my home church. So so I grew up Southern Baptist, pastored 2 Southern Baptist churches, and was a missionary overseas for many years with the Southern Baptist Convention.
So what was your own spiritual journey that took you to the LGBTQIA? I mean, besides your personal connections, but spiritually, how did you reconcile what you were taught as a kid and what's being taught at the Creation Museum and who you are now?
Right. So I think exposure helps quite a bit to question your presuppositions when you see people of faith who are compassionate and different from you. And so you start questioning whether or not all that you were taught was true. And I believe, so I sometimes get upset with people who are LGBTQIA and lose or leave their faith. And I'm like, listen, there is room in your faith construct for you. Don't give up and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is room there. And so I found that room in my faith construct. My middle daughter came out 10 years before I did. And so it was a difficult situation for her, and her mother did not take to it well. And there was like casting out demons and all sorts of stuff going on in our household. So it was pretty rough. And all the time I was like, I know this about myself, but I have to keep it inside because I have to keep this family intact. I have to keep my job. I need to keep these things going. And so you just die to yourself in order to keep things rolling along as they can. It really wasn't until my spouse left me that I said, a therapist told me, Jeff, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And I had no idea that I could make that decision. because I'd always lived for other people. And when the therapist gave me that question, I came back 2 weeks later and said, I think I want to be a gay man. He's like, you want to be a gay man, or you want to acknowledge that you already are? And so that began the journey. But I found support in the faith community. I called the past president of Exodus International. Some of you may be familiar with that organization. So I called him and Alan Chambers, and I said, Alan, you don't know me, I know you. What should I do? And he gave me this advice. He said, number one, make sure you have a support network that can be around you. Number two, realize that you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and it's going to be pretty rocky. Number three, give yourself grace, because it is hard, and there are things that you're going to question about yourself going forward, and a lot of things you're going to question about your past. And number four, make sure that you're safe. Get educated on how to be a member of the community without exposing yourself to physical, spiritual, emotional, and psychological harm, which if anyone here is a part of the LGBTQIA community, it can be one of the most toxic communities, and people of your own community can be really, really mean and kind of hateful. So you have to have a little bit of bravery. And finally, realize that you're going to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. And so I did find my prince.
Yeah, you did.
If you want to learn more about the organization and the person that Jeff just referenced, you can watch Pray Away on Netflix. That covers it a bit.
Alan Chambers really took a lot of courage in shutting it down, and was very repentant, and I believe sincerely so, and has taken a stand that's very supportive of the LGBTQIA community. And so, which I think one of the hardest things to do is to admit that you're wrong, and then to make steps to correct what you've broken. There's so much more to talk about and to share, and I am not nearly the expert that my husband is, but he is amazing and fantastic, and a lot easier to listen to and more charming than I could ever be. So hopefully you'll get to hear him and maybe both of us present side by side. So we look forward to being able to journey with you as you have need.
Jeff, thank you so much for your time. Oh, Tim, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. We may also like you to come to our pulpit.
Mhm.
I would be more than honored to do so. Thank you.
With your husband.
Yeah,
Yes.
both of you could do the service together. That would be. I'm chair of the worship committee, so I will be sending
Okay.
an email.
We would love to. We would love to. I brought a message at our church. It was actually a lesson. I preached last weekend, but several weeks before I did a topic, a presentation on side view mirrors, hillbillies, and drag queens. They loved it. It was great. It was great. We had a good time. Thank you all for being so kind.
Jeff, thank you so much for your time tonight and your expertise. It was really great.
It
Bless
was.
you.
And
You're
Thank you,
wonderful.
Jeff.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
your
So glad we
Important-
met you, and
Enjoy your week off.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
important words. Thank you.
bye, everyone.
thanks, Meredith and Tim.
Mm.